Sha Hualing figured that Luo Binghe genuinely didn't care who the other intruder was. He was only concerned with Shen Qingqiu's body, which had been snatched away, so she hastily changed her tune. Liu Qingge can't get that far carrying that by himself. This subordinate will take forces and give chase. No need, said Luo Binghe. Sha Hualing shivered, her heart chilly, a vague premonition welling up within. And indeed she heard Luo Binghe coldly say, I'll go by myself. Call Mo-bei here. At this time, Shen Qingqiu finally came to understand exactly how gentle Luo Binghe had been while controlling the blood mites in his body. If Luo Binghe really wanted to kill someone with heavenly demon blood, the pain would in no way be only on the level of period cramps. He could make you wish you were dead, make it hurt until you couldn't stand straight, couldn't speak until you could only roll around on the floor, and afterward you'd lie there like a corpse, but the head-to-toe anguish wouldn't lessen even the slightest bit. There was no way you could last until it dulled, or until you got used to it. Case in point, after his rampaging fury passed, Luo Binghe had finally remembered that he still had his heavenly demon blood. The person who dragged Shen Qingqiu off in the midst of the confusion had probably reached someplace safe, as their pace slowed and they began to walk while supporting him. Shen Qingqiu wanted to sit, not walk, but he no longer had the strength to speak. He was dragged along half dead for a stretch before that person finally realized something was wrong. They lowered Shen Qingqiu to the ground. The voice they spoke with was both gentle and refreshing, the words measured. They seemed to be a young man. What's wrong? The young man asked in a concerned tone. Were you injured just now? Shen Qingqiu moved his lips, but he still lacked the strength to speak a single word. At present, it was like millions of blood mites were carousing in his capillaries, biting and swelling, squirming and twisting, the sensation both disgusting and agonizing. This was teaching Shen Qingqiu that when Luo Binghe had activated the blood mites in his body before, he had no malice at all, and he had basically been 120% tender-hearted, more or less just briefly teasing him. Shen Qingqiu rapidly ran through the various achievements and honors he'd earned under the system's coercion, and he honestly found it hilarious beyond belief. Exactly where had he gone wrong? How had his actions resulted in Luo Binghe's feelings of that for him? Shen Qingqiu searched himself and concluded that he'd been a staunch straight man from birth, and that all of the heaven and earth could testify to this. There should have been no need to doubt Luo Binghe's orientation either. So exactly whose fault was this? No need to wonder. If a character was derailed, it was of course the author's fault. Everything could be blamed on airplane shooting towards the sky. 2 dry laughs had just left Shen Qingqiu when there was another burst of excruciating pain, and he really did roll around on the ground a couple of times. It seemed that doing this could alleviate the agony a little. He'd hardly rolled anywhere when he was held in place by the person who'd taken him. The young man touched Shen Qingqiu's forehead along with his cheeks. His beard had mostly fallen off, leaving it sparse and patchy, and cold sweat was everywhere. That touch trailed downward until it was at Shen Qingqiu's chest and abdomen. For some reason, the places he touched felt a bit better. Shen Qingqiu sucked in a breath, and he couldn't help but say, my friend, where are you touching? Even a few hours ago, he genuinely wouldn't have cared where others, especially those of the same sex, touched him. They could touch wherever they liked. Please go ahead. But ever since Luo Binghe had opened a series of gates to a new world for him, Shen Qingqiu's worldview, which had been set for the past 20+ years, had suffered a heavy blow. From now on, he needed to look at this world with a new gaze and a more sensitive attitude. especially on the issue of befriending those of the same sex. That person made a "ah" sound, then quickly let go and apologized. "Sorry, I didn't mean to." No, said Shen Qingqiu. "You can touch. Please continue. Thank you." It wasn't an illusion. When this person let go, Shen Qingqiu immediately began to hurt. It seemed like this guy really could pacify the heavenly demon blood. Shen Qingqiu turned his head. He couldn't see the young man's face clearly beneath the moonlight, but those features were more or less bright and refined, the eyes incredibly pellucid. They reflected Shen Qingqiu's silhouette and the crisp moonlight like dew water, the images overlapping within them. Shen Qingqiu looked at those eyes and faintly recalled something, but before he could give it careful thought, something exploded within his brain, the pain so great that he groaned. Shoving his head downward, he curled his fingers into a fist and furiously bashed the ground. Suddenly, Shen Qingqiu felt someone lift him by the back collar, his lower jaw throbbing as his mouth was forced open and a liquid poured in. His tongue was numb, and from the reaction of the acid in his stomach, though he couldn't tell what taste this liquid had, it certainly wasn't anything delicious. Choking, he wanted to spit it out, but the young man covered his mouth. Though his movements were forceful, his tone was incredibly tender. "Swallow," he coaxed. Shen Qingqiu's throat bobbed violently, and in a moment of haste, he ended up swallowing the liquid anyway. Rivulets of the unknown liquid trickled from the corner of his mouth. He lowered his head while coughing harshly, and the young man patted his back from the side, helping him breathe. The shocking thing was that, after this liquid entered his mouth and stomach, the pain from the blood mite's bites, which had tormented him the entire trip, swiftly vanished. Shen Qingqiu's body felt better, but the ground dropped out beneath his heart instead. He seized a fistful of the clothing at the young man's chest. "What did you make me drink?" The young man pried open Shen Qingqiu's fingers one by one, bringing them away from his chest, and smiled. "Does it still hurt?" It didn't hurt. It really didn't hurt. But the fact that it didn't hurt was what made it scary. He'd never imagined that something like heavenly demon blood could have an antidote. As the sense of taste gradually returned to his tongue, Shen Qingqiu felt that the stench of blood within his mouth was also growing stronger. Strong to the point that he felt nauseated. The original work had said very distinctly that all medicines were ineffective against heavenly demon blood. Only heavenly demon blood could keep heavenly demon blood in check. Fuck. Not only had he drunk it twice, he'd drunk heavenly demon blood from 2 different owners. Shen Qingqiu really could fucking live up to the 8 words, quote, "unprecedented and unparalleled, with none before or after," unquote. After thinking this, Shen Qingqiu let out a cheerful whoop, then fell over face first. The sound of ripping flesh. What's more, it was accompanied by hoarse, wretched screams. Shen Qingqiu pressed on his temples, and the scene before his eyes slowly clarified and focused. A sea of blood, a mountain of corpses. Luo Binghe stood wooden in the midst of this purgatory of a scene. He wore black, so the blood couldn't mark his clothes, but half his face was splashed with specks of crimson, and he raised and lowered his sword callously and mechanically. To start, when Shen Qingqiu first laid eyes on Luo Binghe, an image automatically surfaced in his mind, that of Luo Binghe holding Shen Qingqiu's corpse as he rolled off the bed in a heap, so it was hard to look at him directly. But soon he realized that Luo Binghe was massacring his own dream realm constructions. What difference was there between this and stirring his own brains with a knife? He's not an idiot who doesn't know better. Only a madman would do something like this. Though Shen Qingqiu often loved to say that Luo Binghe was a masochist who liked to torture himself, there was no way he could squeeze out a couple of dry laughs over this level of self-torture, or even take the time to ridicule it. Luo Binghe lifted his eyes to Shen Qingqiu, his gaze hazy, like his mind was unclear. But as soon as those eyes reflected Shen Qingqiu's silhouette, they instantly brightened, and he promptly tossed aside the long sword in his hand. He threw it far, far away and then hid his blood-stained hands behind him, calling out in a quiet voice, "Shizun." Then he remembered that his face was stained too, and, as if to remedy this, he wiped at the blood washed over half his face with his sleeves. But the more he wiped, the dirtier it became, and like a child who'd been caught stealing red-handed, he grew increasingly distressed. A stranger the first time, familiar the second, Shen Qingqiu had experience pretending to be a product of artificial intelligence, and he could still project an unperturbed image. He involuntarily softened his voice when he spoke. "What are you doing?" "Shizun, I let you be taken from me again," Luo Binghe said quietly. "This disciple is useless and couldn't even hold on to your body." This answer made Shen Qingqiu's expression and emotions became equally complicated. So, this cruel murder of his own dream realm constructions just now should be considered self-discipline? Given how deft Luo Binghe's actions had been, Shen Qingqiu feared this wasn't the first time Luo Binghe had done this. No wonder Luo Binghe had been unable to distinguish the difference between a product of his dream realm and an intruder from the outside the last time they met. Shen Qingqiu sighed and deliberated for a while before gently comforting him. "What's lost is lost. I don't blame you." Luo Binghe stared at him vacantly. "But that's all I have left now." Shen Qingqiu suddenly didn't dare look him in the eye. Could Luo Binghe really have spent those 5 years clinging to a corpse, to an empty shell Shen Qingqiu hadn't wanted anymore? Luo Binghe's voice abruptly chilled. "After Huayue City, I swore that in this life I'd never let Shizun be taken from me again. But I still let someone else snatch you away." The bitterness, along with the dark red color within his eyes, were both turbulent and deep-set. The long sword he'd tossed aside soared into the air on his command and pierced through the chests of several, quote, people who were on the ground in their death throes. Waves of wretched screaming filled his ears. Shen Qingqiu hastily restrained him. "Don't be reckless," he reprimanded. "Even if you're dreaming, this is no different from self-harm. Don't tell me you've forgotten." Of course Luo Binghe wouldn't have forgotten. He stared straight at Shen Qingqiu, flipping his hand over and pressing it over the back of his old master's. Only after a long while did he say, "I know that I'm dreaming. Only in a dream would Shizun still scold me like this." Upon hearing this line, Shen Qingqiu snapped back to his senses. He couldn't. This was wrong. He couldn't do this to Luo Binghe. If you didn't have that kind of intention towards someone, you shouldn't give them hope. The larger the hope, the larger the disappointment. His confused state of mind would only continue, and it would increase the chance that he would lose all reason. Even if this was a dream, he still couldn't drag his feet and pussy around like this. He had to be decisive. If he continued to indulge such ill-defined involvement, it would become an evil deed. Shen Qingqiu firmly yanked his hand back and corrected his expression, adopting that which he was best at, an unapproachable, countenance, austere and aloof. Then he turned right around and left. Upon being shaken off, Luo Binghe was stunned for a moment, then dashed after him. 世尊, I know I was wrong. If you know you're wrong, don't follow, Shen Qingqiu said coldly. I've regretted it for a long while, but I was never able to tell you, Luo Binghe said anxiously. Are you still angry that I drove you to self-detonate your spiritual energy? I've already fully repaired the meridians in Shi Zun's body. I'm not lying either. As long as I can enter the holy mausoleum, I'll definitely find a way to awaken you again. Shen Qingqiu didn't answer, hesitating over whether he should drop some harsh words to make Luo Binghe give up on this idea. But then Luo Binghe suddenly threw himself forward and embraced him from behind. He hugged Shen Qingqiu firmly, not budging an inch, even if Shen Qingqiu were to thrash and flail like a madman. Shen Qingqiu's entire body stiffened within the hug as if he had been brushed up against some hairy thing, and the fine hairs on his body stood straight up. He gathered energy into his hand, but still didn't truly attack, instead spitting 2 words between gritted teeth. Beat it. It's supposed to be a guarantee that after blackening, Luo Binghe no longer goes down the route of misery. Take your hands off! Luo Binghe turned a deaf ear to his demand. Or is Shi Zun angry about what happened in Jinglan City? Correct, said Shen Qingqiu. Luo Binghe still refused to let go. When I first returned from the endless abyss, I learned that Shi Zun had told everyone else that I was killed by demons. He mumbled. At first, I thought it was because Shi Zun was kind-hearted, that you still had some lingering sentiments and were unwilling to ruin my name. But after we met, I saw Shi Zun's attitude and became scared that I had been too optimistic. I thought that Shi Zun hadn't concealed the truth from me, but because he felt that having brought up a demon would ruin his reputation. He cut a pitiful figure while speaking, the sentences tumbling out one after another, as if he was terrified that Shen Qingqiu would brusquely interrupt and not let him continue. I really wasn't the one who arranged for the sowers. At that time I was so angry. I couldn't think. That's the only reason I let them shut Shi Zun in the water prison. I've known I was wrong for a long time now. There would probably never be a time where the Luo Binghe in reality could ramble non-stop, without caring for his image. In all likelihood, he would only dare prattle on like this within the dreams he created for himself. To push him away during this moment would be like giving a young maiden, one who'd finally worked up the courage to call and broken-heartedly weep to an older sister for comfort and encouragement, a face-turning slap. It was really a bit cruel. Shen Qingqiu was filled with both deep compassion as well as a feeling that this was extremely absurd. What could be more absurd than discovering that the person from whom you'd exhaustively plotted to flee and had indeed fled from for so many years hadn't actually wanted to kill you at all, but wanted to do you instead? Though whether the desire was to kill or to fuck, the result was the same. Shen Qingqiu would still run away with all his might. One party wanted to meet but couldn't, and so had clung to a corpse for 5 years. The other party avoided the first like the plague, but still felt like he ran into him a great deal. Shen Qingqiu's hands were stiff as he raised and lowered them, clenched them and relaxed. In the end, he let out a sigh anyway and patted that head above his. Fuck, I've already lost, he thought. Right now, forget about the harem. A perfectly fine, dark and vicious stallion novel male lead was very possibly still a virgin. Luo Binghe had already put himself in such a state, so it would have been rather inhumane of Shen Qingqiu to shove another knife in. In the end, Shen Qingqiu lost to the deeply tragic act Luo Binghe had sold him, as well as to his own sense of sympathy. Luo Binghe instantly clutched that hand of his. Shen Qingqiu felt that the skin on Luo Binghe's palm, which was pressing into the back of his hand, was uneven. When he looked closer, he realized it was a sword scar. At first, Shen Qingqiu didn't understand why there were so many scars on Luo Binghe's body. But then he suddenly remembered. During their night encounter in Jinlan City for a stretch, Luo Binghe had played cat and mouse with him. When Shen Qingqiu was caught, he had stabbed at Luo Binghe, and Luo Binghe had caught Xiuya's blade point squarely in his hand. As for the wound on his chest and close to his heart, Shen Qingqiu had even less of an excuse for forgetting that. It was from the Immortal Alliance conference. While forcing Luo Binghe to fall, Shen Qingqiu had accidentally stabbed him. It seemed like every time he tried to stab Luo Binghe, the latter had never avoided the strike and had instead always received it head-on, neither dodging nor evading, letting him hack away. Because of this, Shen Qingqiu had stabbed him twice, despite not wishing to either time. Furthermore, after being pierced by his blade, Luo Binghe hadn't healed either wound and instead had purposefully preserved them.